Hi, this is Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens. Today I'm going to commit blasphemy and talk about a gel pen, a pen that has gotten just a huge amount of discussion on the web, and it is so popular that it is very difficult to buy, at least for the list price. It is supposed to be around $40. It is a Japanese pen called the Zento Signature, and it is usually out of stock if you try to get it for a list price, for example, let's say at Jet Pens. You can get it on Amazon, but it's twice the price that it should be. This is the champagne version of the pen. Um, I wanted to find out two things. One, does it really write as wonderfully as people say it does? And why are people so excited about it? Also, I wanted to talk about the fact that this design, this very distinctive design, where the body of the pen comes down, it almost looks like one of those coffee mugs, and works so well in terms of how it posts, is actually based on an iconic pen designed by Kenneth Grange in the 1970s that I have done a elaborate video on and written about, the Parker 25. And if you go on the web, it seems very few people seem to notice how close these two pens are. In fact, it also is an interesting test of AI, because I put in the question, is the Zento signature based on the Parker 25? And AI seems to suggest no, it's not, although they're similar pens that are made a great change in pen design. And I think this is yet there are so many examples, but this is one of those examples where AI just is wrong. And I'm not quite sure why that is. I think that's because AI can't see. It just takes information about pens. And since the Zento signature is a uniball and it has certain characteristics in terms of its design, in terms of its magnetic cap, for example, that it doesn't really know or see that the two pens are really closely connected in terms of the way they look. So that, I think, is interesting. Another reason I'm talking about the Zento is that from time to time I read about a roller ball pen that supposedly writes really, really well. And I think, well, maybe I'm too wedded to fountain pens. Maybe there is another kind of pen out there that would be good for me and I would enjoy. And so this is an interesting test to see how these two pens write, the original Parker 25, which I have given a sterling review to, and the Zento. I should also point out that although they don't make the Parker 25 anymore, there is a very good clone of it that you can get for not a lot of money, and it writes reasonably well. So it's another alternative. One note about terminology: right on the packaging of the Zento signature, it says it's a rollerball, but in some of the literature online from the company itself, it refers to it as a gel pen. And that's because it has to do with the ink. It uses a water-based ink like a traditional rollerball, but its technology and the way in which the refill is supposedly put together is more like a gel pen. So as a result, in this video, I kind of use both terms, keeping in mind that the Zento is actually, I guess, a kind of hybrid, and that supposedly is one of the reasons it writes so well and in a way that is new. So here's the Zento signature pen. I wasn't able to get for a reasonable price the one, I guess perhaps was the original one that came out in 2024 that was black. This is the so-called champagne one, which I think is really quite beautiful. And I guess the part that really reminds me of the Parker 25 is the way in which the uh, uh, barrel of the pen indents. And what's so clever about that on the original, here I'm forgetting, is, of course, that means that it posts really, really well, absolutely securely. And it has this beautiful nib, which is another aspect of the pen, which is so wonderfully designed by Kenneth Grange. I think it's a very elegant design. He also redesigned Parker's logo at the time. And then it has this clip too, which is has some connection, I think, to a paper clip, the office kind of clip. They have made that far more obvious in the Zento design. But here you go. Here's the way in which it looks when it comes together. And I think, again, that these are pens that certainly this is a sibling or child of the Parker 25. You have to keep in mind, and I think people aren't that aware of this, that at the time when Kenneth Grange designed this pen, this kind of a shape was very unusual. I think we're far more used to this shape because it's sort of the shape of coffee mugs that you use in your car that fit into a little hole in the car, right? Thermoses. So maybe we aren't so, key to the fact that this shape was unusual, particularly unusual in pen designs. Now, I'm sure that people who adore the pen, the Zento pen, are saying, well, what really is exciting about it isn't so much the shape, but is things like the whole magnetic element of the pen, which is so satisfying. So it clicks together and comes together because it's magnetic. And then it does that also on the other side, which I think is really unusual, as a matter of fact. When I think of pens like the Visconti pen that has a kind of magnetic coming together, I don't know if it does that when it posts. So this is really very satisfying, and I'm sure there are people who work along somebody who has the Zento signature, and they find it very annoying that they probably spend all day doing this, but it is really cool. And then I also think it is very nice the way in which they designed this paper clip like clip for the pen. Of course, this idea of the clip looks very different from the Lamy clip, but they both have, I think, an origin in the idea of the paper clip. It's just a scale idea, and I think this is something that the designers must know and think about how, at various points in the modern period, people have designed pens with clips that are reminiscent of paper clips. Anyway, and it's nice to see these pens, in fact, together. A lot of the energy in the fountain pen collecting world focuses on vintage pens made before World War II. But I am a great admirer of mid-century modern and even contemporary design. And when I look at these pens, it really pleases me that here's a pen from the 1970s by Kenneth Grange. This is the Lamy pen, which was designed by Wolfgang Fabian in 1980. And now we have the Zento Signature. I wish that I could tell you who the designer of the Zento Signature is, but when I did a search on the web, I couldn't come up with the name of that person. It may be several people that designed it. I wish that industrial designers got more credit and spoke more about their designs and their thinking processes. I encourage Ms. UBC and Uniball to maybe come forward and talk about, since this is such a heralded pen and so many people love it. Of course, one of the reasons they love it is they love the way it writes, and it has this kind of low friction way of writing, which is different from a fountain pen, but still, I guess, gives people a certain degree of pleasure. And I can understand that. For me, ballpoint pens and a lot of rollerball pens require too much pressure, and they skip and they just don't do it for me. But this pen, I have to say, does write nicely. It still, for me, doesn't write as well as a fountain pen. So I'm going to actually write with it. And just, since we're looking at these two pens together, I'm going to use the Parker 25 as a kind of comparison point. I think in terms of the price of the Parker 25 in the 1970s, it was not an expensive pen, and its target audience, I think, in a way is similar. The idea of people who, are returning to handwriting or want to use handwriting. Fountain pen had gone out, but Parker was trying to bring it back and to give it a certain kind of sexiness and pizzazz. And I think that's something that Uniball is trying to do with this pen. If this pen were $40, I think it is definitely worth it. It is both metal and plastic. It is very pleasing, I think, to look at. I love the way it posts so securely. It's a terrific, I think it is a terrific pen for what it is. It's not, I wish it were a fountain pen. Actually, that's really what I beg. I beg them, Uniball, please make this into a fountain pen, and I would be happy as a clam, which is one of my favorite expressions, because I never think of clams as actually being happy, but of course they look like they're smiling all the time. So I am going to do a writing sample and compare the two. So, of course, there are many differences between a rollerball and a fountain pen. I mean, obviously, the most obvious difference is the whole nib and the way that you can get a refill. If you don't want to spend upwards of, $40, $50 on this pen, you can get a much less expensive version of the Zento pen. You can buy them in, 4, 8 packs or whatever. And then the pen is, much, much cheaper, but it doesn't come in this really nice body with the magnetic opening and closing. And I think that is part of the appeal of the way it writes, the way it feels in your hand. It's a surprisingly heavy pen, and it feels expensive. And of course, you can spend all day clicking it together. So that's part of the appeal of this pen. Now, how does it write? So here it is, the Zento Signature. Now, this is the champagne version. It also comes in a 5 and I guess millimeter and 7 millimeter. This is the thicker line. And of course, once you buy the pen, you can put a refill in it and change the width. And I think it also will take other manufacturers' refills. And I suppose you can also put the Zento refill in other pens. So that's another interesting thing. But however, you're limited to the kind of ink colors that you can use, which is something that's not so great about a rollerball in comparison to a fountain pen. Anyway, this is black, and I would say that this is one difference between a fountain pen black, which is that there's slightly grayness to the color that it makes it less appealing to me. It's not as black as some black fountain pen inks, and also some marker inks. This is rodeo paper. Okay. So there's no difference in line width. And I would say that it does move across the paper with a kind of smoothness, almost slipperiness, because there is some resistance, but that resistance isn't quite consistent. And then there is this aspect that to the line, at least when I use it, that there is a slight width change in the beginning of the line and also at the end of the line that doesn't happen so much with a fountain pen. and but does happen to, with me at least, with a pen and rollerball, and I actually don't like that. It's sort of the pen hitting the paper makes it slightly wider, and then you draw the line. You can see it happening really there. Now here's something that also is interesting about the Zento, is that the ink is surprisingly wet and it smears if you go over it. And I don't know to the degree that that is true with other roller balls or as true as that as this is. Part of the way in which they're able to create this kind of smooth writing experience is by what they do with the ink. And to make the ink kind of flow, it doesn't dry quite as fast as I think some other kinds of inks. And so that's something to keep in mind, particularly if you're left-handed and your hand might go across the ink and smear it. And that makes it somewhat more similar to a fountain pen. Now, if you also have been following my channel, you'll notice that my handwriting has steadily become more blocky, but also clearer. And I've made this really careful attempt to try to improve my handwriting, not to make it beautiful, but to make it absolutely readable. And part of the way I do that is by writing very slowly. So the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Okay. I really do like the way this writes, but not as much as a fountain pen. It has a bit of resistance, um, and that resistance isn't quite consistent. So it kind of feels a little bit like it's fighting me ever so slightly, and but it doesn't skip, and it is very pleasant. And I would say that if I had to use a rollerball, this is very nice. Um, Now here is the Parker 25, which I think even in terms of comparison, in terms of design, it's a nice comparison in terms of writing, because when this pen came out in the 1970s, it was around the same price point, I think, and it wasn't a super expensive pen, but it had a similar mission, which was to really excite, I think, young people, to have a design that would seem cool, and to sort of revive interest in a kind of writing, fountain pens, which had gone out of fashion. Now, certainly more people use rollerball pens if they write, but of course now so few people actually hand write at all. So I think there's some of a similar kind of excitement to create a pen that people will want to journal with and use. Anyway, let's try this. This is the Parker 25. And you immediately notice that it's wetter, but also much darker, I think, or darker to me in terms of the way the ink itself looks, and has a certain liveliness to it, even though it's not a nib that has any um, difference in terms of the width when you write with it. It doesn't have that little tendency, however, to have like a little bump in the beginning. That's because with fountain pen, you don't need to press down. So this is actually it's Waterman Serenity Blue. But I think there's a bit of residual black ink in it, which is why the blue looks so dark. And it looks shiny because it's wet. Um, and it doesn't have much line difference. In fact, it has none. But the big difference is that when you write with it, it just the ink comes out and you don't need to press at all. So it really is good for people who have carpal tunnel. Andrew Wong was talking about that last week. What drew him to fountain pens? Okay, and this is the quick brown fox jumps over is a dog. It's subtle, but I just think the line here has more energy, it's more elegant, I guess. And it's just, for me, much nicer to write with this fountain pen, even though I would say this is not I love the way the nib looks on this pen, but it's relatively smooth, but it's not like the greatest nib of all time, right? I'm not comparing the Zento with a $500 fountain pen like the Pelikan M800, which is one of my favorite pens. This was at the time fairly affordable, and you can get the clone version from Moon Man for around $20. But of course, it doesn't have the magnetic clicking together that you get with the Zento pen. That is so cool. And so this is a very different day-to-day experience that you're going to have with a pen. And of course, you don't have all the fuss of a fountain pen filling it with ink. Although, of course, the Parker 25 or the Moon Man use cartridges. So if you are somebody who hates filling fountain pens, using it with a cartridge is a solution. But a rollerball pen is not going to dry out as easily. You don't have to really worry. You don't have to worry about cleaning it. So there are advantages to that. Okay, well, it's interesting, I think, this comparison. And actually, I like having this pen in my arsenal because sometimes I just need to grab a pen to sign a check or something. And it fits in my pocket, and all that is quite nice. I really do like the clip. And the only thing I don't like about it is the fact that it is so hard to get. And I really don't understand that. I'm sure that the shop owners who want to sell this pen are very frustrated by the fact that it is so difficult to get. And it's been like that now for over a year, as far as I know. So I would urge Uniball to figure out what is the problem with making enough of these. And at the same time, I also urge them to think about making this as a fountain pen, because I think that would be a hit. And I would be willing to pay a premium price for this pen if it were a fountain pen. So thank you. As always, if you enjoy this, please give it a like. Please subscribe. It's free, and it is the way to support what we do on this channel.